On a silent Christmas night in the frozen mountains of Colorado, a lone police officer drives a road most people fear to travel. Even the wind seems to hold its breath beside him, but suddenly his loyal German shepherd rises in terror and refuses to go forward. What the dog sees in the darkness will pull a stranger back from the edge of death and awaken a secret buried for 5 years beneath snow, silence, and blood. This is not just a rescue story. This is a story of instinct, destiny, and a second chance at life. Before we begin this journey, tell me where you are watching from and leave your city in the comments. And if you believe stories of hope and loyal dogs deserve to be shared, please press subscribe to support the channel and stay with us for this miracle in the snow. Christmas descended upon the mountain town of Ash Ridge, Colorado, with the quiet weight of a prayer held too long in the chest. Snow fell in thick, steady curtains, softening the sharp lines of rooftops, burying the narrow roads, and turning the forested slopes into a silent cathedral of white. Ash Ridge was a small town pressed between cliffs and pine forests, a place where everyone knew everyone else's grief before they knew their own joy. The night air was brittle with cold, the kind that crept into the lungs and made each breath feel borrowed. Along the upper ridge road, a single patrol truck moved slowly through the storm, its headlights slicing 2 narrow tunnels of visibility through the swirling snow. Behind the wheel was Officer Daniel Brooks, 38 years old, tall and powerfully built, with broad shoulders shaped by years of physical discipline and emotional restraint. His hair, once dark brown, had begun to gray at the temples far earlier than most men his age, a quiet signature of winters that had asked too much of him. His face carried the controlled calm of a man trained to remain steady in chaos, but his eyes betrayed a different truth, deep-set, hazel, permanently shadowed by memories he never spoke about. 3 years earlier, a drunk driver had taken his wife on an icy curve not unlike this one, and since then, Daniel had learned to move through life with precision rather than hope. To the townsfolk, he was dependable, quiet, respectful, a man who showed up when others broke. To himself, he was simply surviving. In the passenger seat lay Shadow, a 7-year-old male German shepherd, retired K9. His body long and lean, his coat a blend of deep black along the spine and storm gray along his sides, dusted lightly with snow that had drifted in from the open window crack. His left ear bore a jagged scar near the edge, a permanent remnant of a knife wound sustained during a narcotics raid years earlier. Shadow's amber eyes were half closed, his breathing slow and rhythmic, but even in rest, his body held a warrior's tension. He had served 4 tours in active K9 duty with federal task forces, specializing in search and rescue and human tracking, and retirement had never fully settled into his bones. To Daniel, Shadow was not a partner in uniform anymore. He was family, the last living bridge to a version of himself that had once believed in futures instead of just duty. The radio crackled with static and went quiet again. No calls, no updates, just snow and road and silence. Daniel flexed his fingers against the steering wheel. "Almost done, boy," he murmured softly, his voice low and steady. Then, warm floor and bad coffee. Shadow's ear twitched faintly, but he did not stir. The patrol truck climbed higher into the switchback stretch the locals grimly called Dead Man's Bend, a narrow curve carved into the mountainside, where visibility vanished and accidents were memorialized by crosses half buried in snow. Daniel reduced speed, instinct tightening every muscle in his body. The headlights cut across the blowing white like searchlights over an ocean of ice. Then Shadow rose, not slowly, not with hesitation. He surged upright in one sharp, fluid motion, his entire frame rigid, paws braced against the seat, spine straight as steel cable. A low, vibrating growl rolled from deep in his chest. Not fear, not aggression, but warning. His eyes locked forward, pupils narrowed to burning slits of gold. The air in the cab seemed to tighten around him. Daniel's breath caught. "Shadow?" he whispered. The road ahead looked empty. No movement, no headlights, no sound beyond the wind. Shadow did not move. Every instinct Daniel had learned in uniform surged to the surface. In 7 years, Shadow had never false alerted, not once. Daniel slammed the brakes. The truck fishtailed violently, sliding sideways across packed snow, tires screaming, until it came to a violent stop less than 10 feet from the cliff's edge. The engine shuddered into silence. Before Daniel could speak again, Shadow launched from the open door into the storm. "Shadow!" Daniel shouted, panic punching through his lungs as he shoved the door open and leapt after him. The slope dropped sharply, thick with drifts and hidden ice. Daniel slid, fell once, caught himself on a frozen branch, and continued downward, lungs burning as snow filled his boots. Branches lashed his jacket. His hands went numb almost instantly. Then he saw it. Half buried among the trees, nose down in a drift nearly 5 feet deep, lay a dark sedan, its rear tires still faintly visible, its taillights frozen into dull red crystals under a sheath of ice. The windshield was spiderwebbed with frost and cracks. The engine was dead. The driver's side door hung partly open, its edge buried in snow. Daniel rushed to it, heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. Inside the car lay a young woman. She was slumped sideways against the center console, her long, dark hair tangled with frost, her eyelashes white with ice. Her skin was pale to the point of translucence, her lips an alarming blue. She wore a light coat utterly unfit for the storm. One gloved hand rested against the steering wheel, frozen in the shape of desperate effort. Her chest moved faintly, barely. Shadow pressed against her immediately, positioning his body along her side, curling into her as tightly as the confined space allowed, his thick fur offering the only source of warmth she had left in the world. Daniel checked her pulse with trembling fingers. It was there, slow, weak, but alive. Relief hit him so hard his vision blurred. He reached for his radio, no signal. With careful movements, he unfastened her seatbelt and lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been, her body rigid with cold. Shadow stayed pressed to her as Daniel climbed back up the slope, the storm howling like a living creature around them. By the time they reached the truck, Daniel's arms were shaking from exertion and cold. He laid her gently across the back seat, wrapped his spare thermal blanket around her, and cranked the heat to maximum. Shadow climbed in beside her immediately, draping his entire body along hers, his heartbeat and warmth a living engine against the cold. As the truck turned back toward town, Daniel glanced once more into the rearview mirror. Shadow's eyes never left the woman's face. Whatever this night had begun, it had chosen Shadow first, and Shadow had obeyed. The storm did not loosen its grip on Ash Ridge when Daniel's patrol truck tore through the sleeping streets toward the small medical clinic at the edge of town. Snow battered the windshield like handfuls of ash from a dying fire, and the wind screamed through the alleyways as if the mountains themselves were calling out. The town's buildings hunched low under the weight of winter, windows dark, roofs bowed, everything waiting for morning that felt impossibly far away. Daniel drove faster than protocol allowed, but not faster than necessity demanded. In the back seat, the unconscious woman lay wrapped in blankets, her skin pale and unresponsive, her breath shallow. Shadow lay pressed against her torso, his entire body curved around her like a living barrier between life and cold. The clinic was small, only 6 rooms and 1 emergency bay, built decades ago when Ash Ridge still believed it might one day become a city instead of remaining a forgotten mountain outpost. The automatic doors burst open as Daniel carried the woman inside, his boots tracking snow and slush across the floor. A nurse rushed forward immediately. Nurse Evelyn Hart, a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair, pulled into a tight bun, and a voice that never trembled even when the room did. She had delivered half the town and stitched up the other half. Her movements were brisk, precise, built from decades of seeing how fragile and stubborn the human body could be. Hypothermia, Daniel said urgently. She was in a wreck, probably out there for hours. Evelyn did not waste time on questions. Room 1, now. Doctors moved with silent efficiency, cutting away frozen clothes, attaching monitors, threading IV lines, flooding the woman's body with warm fluids and oxygen. Daniel stepped back only when they physically pushed him aside. Shadow tried to follow, but Evelyn stopped short when she saw the dog attempt to slip into the treatment room. Normally, no animals, she said, then hesitated when she saw the woman's trembling pulse on the monitor. But he stays. Just the dog. No one else. Shadow padded forward immediately and settled beside the bed with practiced instinct, placing one paw gently across the woman's forearm, as if reminding her how to keep returning to the surface of the world. Hours passed in the strange, elastic silence of the medical waiting. Daniel sat rigid in the hallway chair, hands clenched together, boots still wet with snow. He had filled out what little paperwork he could. Unidentified female, mid to late 20s, vehicle registered out of state, no local address. The wrecked sedan had been towed from the mountain slope at first light, its Oregon license plate barely visible beneath ice. At dawn, the storm eased, and the woman whispered a name. Daniel heard it because Shadow reacted first. The dog's ears shot upright, his head lifted sharply. His entire body stiffened as if struck by invisible lightning. The woman's lips parted, brittle with dehydration and cold. The words slipped free like breath escaping a closed fist. "Luke!" Daniel froze. The room seemed to tighten around that single name. Luke Harris. The sound of it traveled backward through time and slammed into memory with brutal force. Luke had been Shadow's original handler, tall, reckless, always smiling in the face of danger. The kind of man who laughed loudest before breaching doors no one else wanted to touch. 5 years earlier, Luke had vanished during a classified operation targeting a federal human trafficking network. No body had ever been recovered. The report read, "Killed in action," stamped and sealed with bureaucratic finality. Shadow had stopped eating for weeks after that. Daniel had adopted him out of quiet mercy and shared grief. Now that name rose from the mouth of a dying stranger. Evelyn frowned as she adjusted the IV drip. "Who's Luke?" she asked softly. Before Daniel could answer, the woman stirred again. Her eyelids fluttered. Her gaze moved slowly through light and shadow, as if the world were a foreign place she barely recognized. When her eyes finally focused, they found Shadow first. Tears spilled instantly. "Shadow," she whispered, her voice cracked and small but unmistakably real. Daniel's lungs emptied of air. She knew the dog. Her eyes tracked upward to Daniel's face with visible effort. Did he send you?" she asked faintly. "Who?" Daniel asked carefully. Her eyes closed again as exhaustion claimed her. "My brother." The next day brought light and truth in measured fragments. Her name was Emily Carter, 29 years old, kindergarten teacher from Eugene, Oregon. She had disappeared 11 months earlier after reporting being followed on her commute home. Her car had been found abandoned outside Bend, doors open, no sign of a struggle, no body. The case had been marked as unresolved and then quietly buried beneath newer tragedies. Emily spoke slowly, haltingly. Each sentence wrestled from ice and trauma. She said she had been taken from a gas station restroom, held for weeks, moved between places so often she stopped knowing where she was. Then, during a transport in the mountains, a crash, screaming, snow, darkness, nothing else. When Daniel asked about Luke, she trembled. "He found something," she said softly. "Before I disappeared, he told me he'd uncovered names, routes, money trails. He said Shadow was the only one who could keep it safe. Then he vanished, and after that, they started watching me." The room fell silent. Shadow had not left her side once. By the third day, Emily could sit up without assistance. By the fifth, she could speak without shaking. By the seventh, she could stand at the window and watch the snow fall in quiet disbelief. Daniel visited every evening after his shift ended. He never stayed long, never asked too much. He brought coffee for her, Evelyn, fresh towels. Once, a paperback novel Emily said she liked but hadn't finished before she vanished. There was something fragile and unspoken growing between the three of them. Not romance, not rescue, but recognition. Survivors recognize other survivors by the way they breathe. On the 8th night, Emily woke from a nightmare screaming. Daniel was there within seconds. Shadow was already pressed against her chest, grounding her with warmth and weight. "He's alive!" she gasped. "Luke, I saw him. He's running. He's hiding. They're still looking for Shadow." Daniel's pulse slowed to ice. "That's impossible," he said gently. Emily shook her head violently. "You don't understand. He told me once. Shadow was the key, and keys don't die. They get hunted." Shadow's gaze lifted at the word hunted. Something ancient passed through his eyes. Outside the clinic, the storm began again. The snow stopped falling on the ninth morning after Emily awakened, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the storm itself. Ash Ridge emerged slowly from beneath its white shroud, like a town half remembering its own shape. Roof lines reappeared, fences breathed again, and the mountain road that had nearly ended everything lay pale and deceptive beneath a thin crust of ice. Inside the small police station at the edge of town, the mood was cautious, unsettled, as if the winter had delivered something it did not yet intend to reclaim. Sheriff Henry Cole stood at the front window, hands clasped behind his back. At 64, Henry had the posture of a man carved from long years of responsibility. Straight-backed, compact, his movements economical and deliberate. His hair was mostly silver now, cropped short in the old military style he had never abandoned. A deep scar ran along his jawline, a relic of a bar fight from his younger days when Ash Ridge was rougher and he was angrier. The town trusted him not because he was perfect, but because he endured. Henry had buried a wife, buried a son, and still showed up every morning before dawn. Daniel stood a few feet behind him, arms folded, eyes watching the empty street. Shadow lay at his feet, alert but still, his head lifted toward the door. "They came again," Henry said quietly. "Who?" Daniel asked. "The men I told you about. Third time this week." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Same question?" Henry nodded. "Same words, different faces." Daniel turned to him. "Tell me exactly." Henry exhaled slowly, as if weighing each memory before allowing it into the room. First one showed up 2 weeks ago. Late 40s, clean boots, no mountain dust on him. Said he was a dog buyer looking for retired K9s. Didn't ask about any handler, didn't care about certifications. Just one question. Henry's eyes shifted briefly toward Shadow. Asked if we had a German shepherd with a scar on the left ear. Shadow's ear twitched. Second man came 4 days later, younger, nervous, same question, same description. Yesterday, third one. Different voice, same words. Daniel felt a slow, cold understanding coil through his chest. They're not looking for Emily. Henry shook his head. No, they're looking for the dog. Daniel looked down at Shadow. The weight of that truth settled heavily between them. Henry turned away from the window and pulled open an old metal filing cabinet with a groan of rusted rails. He retrieved a thin folder, edges worn soft with age. He placed it on the desk between them. "You ever wonder why Luke Harris was really marked dead so fast?" Henry asked. Daniel stiffened. "Because that's what the report said." Henry tapped the folder once. That report was written by people who wanted the past to stay buried. Daniel opened the file. Inside were photos, transcripts, and classified notices so heavily redacted. They looked like shredded shadows on paper. At the center of it all was a familiar face. Luke Harris, tall, lean, sandy blonde hair, eyes always lit with restless purpose. He had been Shadow's first handler, but he had been far more than that. Luke had been part of a joint federal task force assigned to dismantle an interstate human trafficking network that used rural mountain corridors as transfer routes. "They were never supposed to know what he found," Henry said quietly, "but he copied it anyway." Daniel looked up slowly. "What exactly did he take?" Henry hesitated, then spoke with careful gravity. "A master list, names, drop locations, international financial paths, enough to tear the whole thing open from the inside." Daniel's breath slowed. "Where is it now?" Henry's gaze slid back to Shadow. "Luke didn't trust computers," Henry continued. "Didn't trust servers. He trusted one thing, the dog. He embedded the data into a military-grade micro-storage chip and mounted it directly into Shadow's collar casing. Power efficient, dormant unless activated at the correct frequency." Daniel felt the room tilt slightly. "You're saying Shadow has been carrying the proof of an entire trafficking network this whole time?" Henry nodded once. Luke knew they'd never think to look for it inside a retired K9. Not officially, not publicly. Daniel's voice was low. "Then why are they here now?" Henry closed the folder slowly. "Because they finally realized Luke didn't die with his secrets." Silence returned, sharp and clean. That afternoon, Daniel visited Emily at the clinic. She was sitting upright now, color gradually returning to her cheeks, her long, dark hair braided loosely over one shoulder by Nurse Evelyn. Emily looked smaller without the chaos around her, but her eyes carried a watcher's alertness, the kind that never quite leaves a person who has been hunted. "You're moving me, aren't you?" she asked softly when Daniel entered. Daniel did not deny it. "We can't keep you here anymore, not with strangers asking questions in town." Emily nodded once. "And Shadow? He comes with us." Her shoulders loosened just slightly at that. By dusk, Daniel had packed enough supplies for several nights and loaded them into an unmarked utility truck borrowed from the town maintenance garage. Shadow jumped into the back willingly. Emily climbed into the passenger seat with care, her movements still stiff from lingering weakness. The road out of town narrowed quickly, swallowed again by forest and shadow. The old hunter's supply cabin lay nearly 9 miles beyond the last streetlight of Ash Ridge, hidden in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. It had once served as a winter refuge for seasonal trappers decades earlier, before the forest trails fell out of official maps. The building was long abandoned but structurally sound. One room, reinforced door, small generator shack buried beneath snow. Daniel cut the engine when they reached it. The forest was utterly silent. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of old pine, oil, and dust. Daniel lit the lantern and checked every corner, every latch, every window. Emily sat on the narrow cot and slowly exhaled a breath she had been holding for far too long. Shadow circled the space once, nose to the floor, then settled near the door with his back to the wall, eyes fixed on the entrance. Night deepened. Snow began to fall again. Miles away, on the southern access road beneath the ridge, a pair of headlights switched off. 2 figures stepped from the darkness and studied the faint outline of the forest ahead. The hunt had reached Ash Ridge. The cabin had never known light like this. A single lantern burned on the rough wooden table, its flame trembling as wind pressed against the walls from every direction. Snow returned with a different sound than before, no longer gentle, no longer drifting, but hissing and striking the roof like thrown sand. The forest around the clearing disappeared into a curtain of white, as if the mountains had decided to erase themselves for the night. Inside, Emily slept fitfully on the narrow cot, bundled in blankets, her breathing shallow but steady. Her face was still pale, the faint shadows beneath her eyes betraying how close she remained to the edge of exhaustion. Even in a sleep, her brow tightened now and then, as if her mind refused to rest where her body demanded it. Trauma had taught her that dreams were never empty places. Daniel sat on an overturned crate near the door, jacket still on, boots unlaced but not removed. He had not slept. Every unfamiliar sound pulled his gaze upward, the scrape of wind on tin, the distant pop of frozen branches snapping under snow weight, the uneven hush that sometimes followed storms like held breath. He cleaned his sidearm slowly, deliberately, the ritual grounding him in something precise. At his feet lay Shadow. The dog did not sleep. He remained upright, shoulders squared, head angled toward the door, ears rotating in smooth, constant arcs, as if mapping the forest through sound alone. The scar on his left ear caught the lantern glow like a thin silver fault line. His amber eyes reflected firelight in narrow, steady beams. Retirement had softened nothing essential in him. The woods were speaking, Shadow was listening. Near midnight, something changed. It was not a sound. It was an absence of sound. The wind slackened abruptly. The snapping of branches ceased. Even the hiss of falling snow softened into a strange, muffled quiet. Shadow's body reacted before any human sense could interpret the shift. His spine stiffened. A low, uncertain growl vibrated in his chest. Not warning, not aggression, but confusion. Daniel rose slowly. His hand moved toward the radio clipped to his belt. Then the air itself shifted. It came through the vent. The cabin had once been fitted with a crude ventilation shaft for winter trappers, an old metal channel running from the roof down through the wall behind the stove. Daniel saw the faint ripple first, a distortion in the lantern flame, as if the fire were bowing to something unseen. A dull, sweet metallic scent followed an instant later. Shadow snapped his head toward the vent and barked once, short, sharp, urgent. Daniel's stomach dropped. "Emily!" he called out, already moving. The gas reached them almost immediately. It did not burn. It did not choke. It slid into the lungs gently, deceitfully, carrying with it a sudden weight behind the eyes and a soft weakening along the limbs. It was not designed to kill. It was designed to make resistance slow. Daniel took 2 steps toward the cot and felt the floor tilt beneath him. Shadow lunged forward instinctively, placing his body between Emily and the door, but his movements lost sharpness, edges blunted by the invading haze. His growl faltered into a breathy vibration. Daniel reached Emily's side and shook her shoulder. "Wake up," he said, forcing focus through the fog trying to close around his mind. "Emily, wake up." Her eyes fluttered, unfocused. "Daniel!" He grabbed the emergency respirator mask from the supply case and pressed it over her face. "Breathe through this. Do not take it off." He tried to do the same for Shadow. The dog took 1 staggering step forward, then another. His hind legs wavered as if the earth itself had loosened beneath him. He pushed his head toward Daniel's hand once, trust unbroken, before his strength faltered. The gas did not conquer him immediately, but it bent him, slowed him, dragged at every muscle as if gravity itself had turned hostile. The door exploded inward. It was not kicked, it was breached. Wood cracked outward in a burst of splinters as 3 dark figures spilled into the lantern light, masked, layered in insulated gear, boots soundless on the cabin floor. Their movements were methodical, professional, unhurried. This was not desperation. This was procedure. Daniel turned. The first blow struck the side of his head with the blunt arc of a reinforced baton. White light burst across his vision. Pain bloomed late, roaring up the side of his skull as the world twisted violently sideways. He fought anyway, elbow driving backward, shoulder slamming forward, but his movements lagged behind intention, the gas pulling precious fractions of a second from every command his brain issued. A second strike dropped him to his knees. Shadow charged. Even drugged, even weakening, the old K9 launched himself at the nearest intruder with a snarl torn straight from battle memory. His jaws closed on padded forearm instead of flesh, his teeth failing to find purchase through heavy fabric. But the impact drove the man backward into the wall with enough force to knock the lantern from the table. Fire spilled across the floor in shattered glass and hissing sparks. The room plunged into chaotic shadow. A sharp hiss cut through the air. A needle struck Shadow's flank. A second dose, small, calculated, merciless. Shadow's limbs buckled. His body slammed into the floor beside Emily's cot, breath leaving him in a shudder that was almost a whine. His eyes remained open. They searched the room wildly, not in fear, but in defiance, an animal refusing to surrender even as his muscles betrayed him. Daniel tried to rise again. A boot struck his chest and drove the air from his lungs. The world dimmed at the edges. Through the blur, he saw Emily being lifted from the cot, her respirator mask ripped away, her weak hands struggling uselessly against arms stronger than her strength, could answer. Her voice reached him distantly, broken, terrified, calling his name through layers of fog. He tried to shout. Sound did not obey. Through the widening tunnel of his vision, he saw Shadow drag himself forward inch by inch, claws carving shallow grooves into the wooden floor. One of the men knelt beside him and tore at the collar casing with brutal efficiency. Plastic cracked, metal snapped. The chip housing separated. The collar was wrenched free and tossed aside. Shadow's gaze fixed on Daniel one last time, not in fear, in apology. The world went black. Cold reclaimed the cabin slowly after the intruders vanished into the storm with Emily. Snow found its way through the shattered door and settled across the floorboards like quiet ash. The fire sputtered and died. Shadow lay unmoving beside the cot, his breathing faint but present, each rise of his chest an argument against the darkness. Daniel returned to himself in fragments, first the pain, then the cold, then the memory. He pushed up on trembling arms and cried out as the room spun violently. His head rang, his vision swam. The cabin smelled of smoke, gas, and blood. Not much blood, but enough to matter. He crawled toward the cot and found only rumpled blankets and empty space. "Emily," he whispered. No answer. Shadow stirred weakly at the sound of his voice. Daniel dragged himself to the dog's side, fingers searching his fur for wounds. There was blood at the injection site and a shallow cut along his flank where broken glass had found flesh, but nothing life-ending. The second dose had been measured precisely for incapacitation, not execution. They had needed Shadow alive. Daniel's gaze fell to the floor. The collar lay broken. The chip was gone. The storm howled outside like something alive and satisfied. Daniel knelt there in the frozen ruins of the cabin, one hand gripping Shadow's fur, the other pressed to the floor, breath coming in ragged, shaking pulls. For a moment, a brief, dangerous moment, despair crept close enough to touch him. Then memory answered. Luke's voice, distant but clear, surfacing from a winter long buried. "If one day the world turns on you," Luke had said quietly years ago, standing beside a training field under falling snow, "don't chase the noise, trust the second frequency." Daniel rose slowly. He staggered outside into the storm and ran to the utility truck. His fingers trembled as he retrieved the old handheld military receiver Henry had given him only hours earlier, a device Luke had once modified personally. He keyed in the dormant sequence with numb precision. Static hissed. Nothing. He adjusted the dial slightly. A faint pulse answered, weak, intermittent, but unmistakably alive. Emily was not gone into silence. Shadow was not lost in vain. The snow fell harder, colder, merciless. And the signal still breathed. The signal led upward, not across valleys, not through towns, but straight into the spine of the mountains. North Vale had earned its name through generations of winter deaths and unclaimed echoes. It was a forbidden ridge, a place where storms did not simply pass through, but gathered, bred, and returned stronger. The forest thinned as the elevation climbed, pines shrinking into skeletal silhouettes bent beneath endless wind. The sky above it never truly cleared, only shifted between shades of iron and ash. Daniel did not climb alone. By the time dawn broke pale and hard over Ash Ridge, Sheriff Henry Cole stood beside him at the trailhead with a compact rescue team of 4, Deputy Mark Ivers, early 30s, broad-backed, quietly fearless. Ranger Sophia Alvarez, mid-40s, lean, sharp-eyed, born to the mountains. Medic Travis Moore, late 20s, restless hands, steady heart. And Daniel himself. None of them spoke of probability. They spoke only of time. The receiver's signal pulsed faintly in Daniel's gloved hand. Still alive. They began the climb at first light. Snow rose knee-deep within minutes. Wind carved exposed skin with invisible knives. The trees thinned until the world became a vast, hostile cathedral of rock, ice, and sky. Every step was earned through slipping and strain. Each breath burned with frozen fire. The storm did not rage. It endured, which was worse. It never exhausted itself. 6 hours passed. No one counted out loud. The signal grew weaker, then stronger, then weaker again, as if even the device were struggling for permission to exist in such a place. Near the 7th ridgeline, Sophia raised her fist. Cabin. Half buried in the slope below them, its roof collapsed inward on one side, its windows dark, stood a structure made from the same stubborn wood as the forest itself. Snow had swallowed its outline until it seemed more like a scar in the mountain than a shelter. No smoke rose from the chimney, but the signal pulsed strongest here. Daniel felt it before he saw it. The door was reinforced from the inside. Mark moved first, slow and careful. Sophia circled wide. Daniel approached straight on, receiver clutched tight to his chest, as if it could feel fear. Henry remained 10 paces behind, rifle steady against the storm. Daniel kicked once. The door did not break. He kicked again. Wood cracked inward with a wounded cry, and the door gave way with a heavy, final collapse. Cold rushed out of the cabin, like breath leaving a dying mouth. Inside, the darkness was thick enough to drown sound. Then Travis's flashlight cut through it. "On the floor," Travis whispered. Emily lay bound with plastic cable at the wrists and ankles, curled on her side near the far wall. Her face was pale beyond winter pale, her lips trembling with shallow, erratic breathing. Her eyes fluttered as light struck them, but no strength followed, and beside her, Shadow. He was trussed with rope at the chest, and hind legs, His body stretched awkwardly across the frozen floor. His fur was matted with blood and ice. The wound at his flank had reopened from strain and movement. His chest rose only faintly. His eyes were closed. Daniel did not remember crossing the room. He was suddenly on his knees at Shadow's side, hands shaking as they searched for signs of life. For one terrifying breath, there was nothing. Then a breath came, weak but defiant. "He's alive," Daniel said, his voice breaking as if through glass. Travis moved to Emily immediately, cutting restraints with surgical speed. "She's hypothermic again, barely holding." A sound moved near the back of the cabin. The man emerged from the shadow without panic. He was not dressed for combat. He wore layered winter gear, scavenged and mismatched, his boots worn thin, his gloves stitched in places where fabric had failed. His face was narrow, sharply angled, eyes too alert for a man who claimed no authority. He carried a handgun, raised not in threat, but in tired inevitability. "I'm not the one you're hunting," he said calmly. Sophia raised her weapon. Henry did not move. "Then you picked the wrong mountain," Henry replied. The man swallowed. "I clean what's left. I don't build the machine. I just erase the footprints." Daniel stood slowly, Shadow's blood streaking his gloves. "Where is the chip?" The man's gaze flicked once, almost involuntarily, toward a metal case near the wall. That was answer enough. "You won't leave with it," Henry said. The man exhaled once, sharply. That was never the plan. He fired. The shot ripped past Daniel's shoulder and buried itself into the wooden wall behind him. Chaos shattered the cabin instantly. Mark tackled Sophia aside as another shot thundered. Wood splintered. Ice burst from the walls in brittle shards. Emily cried out weakly. Travis dragged her behind the overturned table as bullets ripped through what little shelter the cabin offered. Daniel moved, not forward, sideways. He slid low across the frozen floor toward Shadow, shielding the dog's body with his own as best he could. The man fired again, too high, too panicked now. Shadow moved, not fast, not strong, but enough. With a sound pulled from the deepest place left to him, Shadow surged upward in a final, ragged explosion of will. Rope burned across his chest as he tore against it. His teeth found flesh this time, not padding. His jaws closed around the man's forearm, with a wet, final certainty born of every hunt he had ever survived. The man screamed. The gun fell. Henry fired once. The fight ended. Silence crashed down after the echo faded. Shadow released his grip and collapsed instantly, his strength finally spent. Blood darkened the snow beneath him. Daniel caught his head before it struck the floor. Emily slumped into unconsciousness as Travis finished stabilizing her. The adrenaline of terror abandoned her at once, leaving only exhaustion behind. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Henry exhaled. "Get them out of here," he said quietly. The descent was faster, more violent than the climb. The storm had begun to break in ragged pieces, wind screaming across exposed ridges like something enraged by loss. Daniel carried Shadow as far as his arms would allow. When they failed, Mark took the weight without a word. Emily was secured between Sophia and Travis, her body lifted and passed like something sacred. By the time they reached the waiting emergency transport at the lower tree line, Daniel could no longer feel his hands. Shadow's breathing faltered twice. Both times, Daniel leaned close and whispered his name, like a prayer too stubborn to die. 3 lives descended from the mountain that day. 3 lives returned from the border that does not promise return. Spring arrived in Ash Ridge without ceremony. There were no sudden blossoms or dramatic shifts in the sky. Winter loosened its grip, the way grief often does. Reluctantly, unevenly, in quiet retreats no one trusts at first. The snow retreated in slow, dirty rivers along the edges of roads. Roofs wept steadily beneath the lengthening sun. The mountains did not look triumphant, they looked tired. So did the hospital. Emily spent 3 months inside its pale walls, 3 months of waking drenched in sweat, heart racing as shadows on the ceiling turned into forests. 3 months of flinching at the sound of wind against glass. 3 months of learning, day by fragile day, that survival was not the same as safety. Her nightmares were always the same. The forest never ended, the snow never stopped, and somewhere behind her, something moved without footsteps. The doctors called it post-traumatic stress disorder with practiced gentleness, as if a clinical name could soften what the mind had learned in terror. The medications helped enough for sleep to return in pieces, but not enough for peace to follow it. Emily kept the bedside lamp on every night. Darkness, she learned, was not absence. It was memory. Shadow recovered more slowly than anyone had expected. The wound along his flank closed cleanly, but the damage to his hind leg told a different story. Nerves had been compressed too long. Muscle memory had to be rebuilt from hesitation. The veterinarian spoke in careful phrases about limited mobility, permanent weakness, the end of pursuit work. Shadow did not understand any of it. He only knew that his leg did not always answer him. That knowledge unsettled him more deeply than pain. Each attempt to stand was an act of negotiation between will and body. Sometimes he won, sometimes he did not. When he failed, he did not whine. He only waited, breathing slow, amber eyes tracking the world, with undiminished vigilance as if daring it to take more. Daniel was there through all of it. Every morning before his shift, every evening after it ended, often in between. He never said he was staying. He simply stayed. He learned the rhythms of the hospital with the same quiet precision he once learned patrol routes. He brought coffee to Nurse Evelyn. He replaced Shadow's water dish before it was empty. He sat beside Emily through the worst nights without asking what the dreams had shown her. He understood now that some battles were fought better without questions. In the third week, Emily finally asked him, "Why do you never go home?" Daniel did not answer right away. Because home, he wanted to say, had become a place with no living witnesses to his past. Because silence grew thicker there than it ever did in hospital corridors. Because grief learned how to echo between walls that never moved. Instead, he said only, "Because you're not home yet." Emily turned her face toward the window and let the snow-melt sunlight warm her skin in silence. Shadow's progress came in defiant increments. The first unaided step took nearly a month, the second 2 days later, the third a week after that. His rear leg trembled beneath him like uncertain ground, but every step was claimed like territory. When he finally walked the length of the recovery room without falling, the entire veterinary staff applauded as if he were a soldier returning from war. Shadow did not look back at them. He looked at Daniel, and only then did his tail move. By the time the mountains fully released their last veins of ice, Emily could walk outside without trembling. The forest no longer sent her pulse into panic at first sight. The darkness still ruled her nights, but it no longer owned the daylight. One afternoon, while sitting on the hospital steps beneath the thawing sky, Emily spoke words that surprised even herself. "I don't think I'm going back to Oregon." Daniel did not ask why. She continued quietly, as if afraid the decision might hear itself. "I want to stay. I don't want to run anymore. I want to build something that doesn't move." 2 weeks later, she found a narrow storefront on Main Street, once a florist, long closed and forgotten, beneath dusty windows and faded paint. She spent every ounce of insurance money she had left to lease it for 1 year. Above the door, she painted the name herself, Second Light. Children arrived slowly at first, 3 in the first week, 6 in the second, 9 by the end of the month. She taught them colors with patience she had once believed was forever lost. She taught them numbers, songs, small rituals of safety. The parents spoke softly about the woman who had returned from the mountain, with shadows in her eyes, but gentleness in her hands. Daniel stood at the back of the classroom on the first morning she opened the door. Shadow lay just inside the threshold. He could no longer chase children across the yard, but he could watch. That was enough. Spring settled fully into Ash Ridge, as if unsure it would be allowed to stay. The nights remained cold. The air still carried the breath of snow, hiding at higher altitudes. But life reclaimed the streets with cautious confidence. One evening, as sunlight spilled gold across the wet pavement, Emily sat beside Daniel on the wooden steps outside his small cabin on the edge of town. Shadow lay between them, his head resting against Emily's ankle, his hind leg stretched awkwardly but comfortably along the boards. For a long time, none of them spoke. The snowmelt traced slow paths through the earth at their feet, joining into narrow streams that whispered softly as they passed. Emily broke the silence first. People keep asking if we're getting married. Daniel nearly laughed. Are we? He asked. She smiled faintly. No. Daniel nodded. Good. She studied his face. You don't believe in beginnings, do you? He considered the question. I believe in continuations, he answered honestly. That satisfied her. Shadow shifted slightly, releasing a slow, content breath. That was the moment Daniel understood. Shadow did not need to return to a training field. Shadow did not need to run toward danger. Shadow had already crossed the greatest distance a warrior ever travels, from purpose to peace, from command to choice. As twilight draped itself across the mountains and the last trace of winter water slipped into the waiting soil, the three of them remained on the steps. No engagement ring, no medals, no public triumph. Only breath, only warmth, only the quiet miracle of staying. Shadow had chosen Ash Ridge, and that was enough. In the quiet closing of this story, we are reminded that the miracles of God do not always arrive with thunder or shining signs. Sometimes they come through the loyalty of a wounded dog who refuses to give up, through a broken teacher who learns to trust life again, and through a tired police officer who chooses to stay instead of run. In our daily lives, we all walk through seasons of fear, loss, and unanswered prayers. Yet God walks beside us even when we cannot see the path, guiding us through darkness and leading us gently back into the light. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us what this story meant to you, and type Amen. If you believe in the quiet miracles God still sends into our lives, may the Lord bless you and your family with peace, protection, and strength in every season. And please remember to press subscribe to support this channel so we can continue bringing stories of faith, love, and second chances to you.